So I'm Sue Merkel. I work with Office of Academic Programs and was asked to help facilitate a discussion about teaching labs. And my hope is that, and I know that all of you will bring stuff with you and we can just share ideas. But anyone else who wants to go next? Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jim Liebherr from entomology, and I teach a immature insects class, Holometabolous larvae. We got through about 55% of the lab, and then we have to wing it for the second half.
Anyone else?
I'm here from mechanical engineering, but I'm not teaching a class right now. I'm one of the ALI postdocs, the Active Learning Initiative postdocs. So I'm just picking up ideas if anything comes our way.
Sure.
I'm Frank Castelli. I'm an ALI postdoc with Intro Biolabs. I'm not making any of the big decisions about what we're doing, but I'm trying to gather information for everyone.
Okay. Tamo, are you there?
Yes, I am. Just interested.
Okay. So let's see.
I'm here as well, Marla Lujan from Nutritional Sciences. I teach the lab component of human anatomy and physiology for a large proportion of pre-med students.
Nice. Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Yasmin. I'm in physics ALI postdoc. I'm overseeing the physics labs and TA training and how to, reform the labs to more active learning.
Okay. Who else is out there?
Bruce Monger's here, and I oversee the teaching of lab sections for large oceanography class.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in?
Quinn Ketterings is here in Animal Science Department. I have a course that's more like a capstone course that has 3-hour labs on Tuesday afternoons. So I'm trying to figure out how to do now.
Okay. Anybody else want to introduce themselves? Okay, so why don't we go ahead and get started. So what I'm hoping is that we can share ideas about how to use learning goals and outcomes to prioritize what has to happen for the rest of the semester. I kind of divided the thinking about lab courses into 3 different categories in terms of what methods we could use for assessing and teaching concepts. So there's equipment, sort of methods related, technique related activities. We want our students to be able to analyze results and conduct experiments. And certainly there's room for discussion for more, but those are 3 that I thought about. And then as we go along and at the end, I'd like to identify resources for teaching online. And I started a Google Doc that I can share with whoever wants it. And I'm hoping that people can add to it because I think we're going to have to rely heavily on those. But this definitely is a discussion that I'm facilitating. I'm going to go through a few framework slides and really just open it up for people to add their brilliant ideas. So I'm basing the framework on understanding by design, where you are thinking about what your overall course goals are. So in this case, what have you already done? But more importantly, what do you have left to do? And suggesting that from those priority goals, you can go through and look at learning outcomes from your activities and ask, is this matching one of my priority goals? Could the students achieve this? If yes, how? And if no, is there an acceptable alternative? One of the words of wisdom I've heard in all the discussions we've had in the last week or so is think about how you can further your course, not by replicating your course online, but by looking at what your course goals are and trying to achieve those. And so it may or may not be linked to activities that you were planning on or usually do in your lab environment, but maybe if there are ways to more closely link the activity with your learning goals. And then how would you assess learning? What evidence do you need? And then how would you implement the instruction? And again, what can you do yourself and what online resources are available? So each of the sections coming up are based on that overall framework. Anyone have questions about any of that or comments about this framework in general before we move to specifics? Okay. So I'm going to use my microbiology lab as an example. Here are learning outcomes from our course. And if I were to look at it and see, okay, what have we done? What have we not done? Suppose I decide that using mathematical reasoning and graphing skills was important and we hadn't done as much, and estimate cell density of cells was important and we hadn't done that yet. What activities do I have that could help students achieve these goals? And so again, just as an example, maybe I'm going to have them do a growth curve experiment. And so this is one that I would say is aligned more with using equipment and analyzing data. So in this case, it's a spectrophotometer, but it could be any method or piece of equipment that you wanted students to use. And so one question is, could they achieve this learning outcome? Well, probably not with the actual piece of equipment, but anyone have ideas of what an acceptable alternative would be? And not necessarily for spectrophotometers, but even equipment or techniques in general. So how could we, if this was our goal, to have students learn a particular method, how could we help them to achieve that goal when they can't physically be in the lab? And I just wanted to throw that out to see what suggestions we had.
Well, I don't know how this would work for people who have strictly lab courses. This is Jim Liebherr from entomology, but historically my course on insect larvae incorporated a field component. It ended up being too much and the weather was too dicey to actually make it work. But what I'm going to have them do is individually go into the field, look for things, find them, and then there's a site called iNaturalist where they would basically put an image online. It's open for anybody to identify it, and so we would be working backwards. We'd be finding something, we'd maybe try to put a name on it, and then I could basically explain to them the traits of that particular kind of organism. I mean, usually in the lab, we work the other way. We look at things and we take them apart, deconstruct them and look at their characters. But we can get to the same point just starting from the other end.
And I like that because there's a lot of peer teaching in there. The students can respond to those images.
Right.
And
even while we're down, the weeks that we're down, I'm starting the site and saying, this isn't graded, but it's a way for you to talk to your classmates. Just, you know, let's just stay in contact. And they're all over the country. So, I mean, they'll be seeing different things.
And I think the points of contact are going to be really important as we move forward. And I know a lot of labs meet once a week, and you may want to think about whether that still makes sense in the online environment, or like you don't necessarily have to stick with your schedule per se, but how would that look differently? Any other ideas about how we can help students know or learn or experience using equipment or carrying out techniques? Nothing?
I would suspect if it's just learning how to use a piece of equipment or what it does, that some Google searches, YouTube videos of performance of some of these pieces of equipment might work.
Yeah, I mean, how do students learn anything these days, right? It's all about YouTube videos, and there's certainly a lot of information about that out there. And granted, it's not as good as doing it, but in very few cases are we actually training students so that they can reliably perform a skill. I think if we focus on the concepts, how does this method work? And do the students understand what the results mean is probably what we're more going for than can they actually manipulate a piece of information. I think if we were a clinical lab, we would feel differently. So definitely videos. Any other ideas?
Well, this is Bruce Monger. I had one idea that maybe there could be a grad student who had this small spectrophotometer in their possession, where the students could say, hey, put this test tube in there and set it up like that. more interactive rather than just watching a pre-recorded video. They could actually instruct the TA to drop the cuvette into the spectrophotometer and see the results, so they feel like they had some control over what was happening.
Sure. And I had heard a colleague mention trying to do either some videos, and I like the idea of doing them live, but of having TAs or grad students do things incorrectly and see if students could identify what went wrong or predict what the results would be if something didn't happen in the right sequence or something.
Mhm.
Other ideas? Okay, so let's see. So I think a trickier one would be assessing. So what evidence would you need to assess learning? Because I'm hearing that this is a huge challenge, not just for the lab-based ones, but for lecture-based courses. I know a lot of labs have practicals, and so how could you help assess whether or not the students were able to use the piece of equipment and figure out how it works?
Hmm.
So this is Chris Loss. At least one thing, since we're using Canvas, at least we have some sort of metric on the the amount of time that they engage with information we give them or material we give them to look at. So at least as far as that's concerned, we have some baseline measurement.
Right. So are students engaging, at the very least? Other ideas for sort of assessing whether or not they can understand a method or a piece of equipment, how it works?
This is Chris again. I don't know. We could turn some of the lab exercises into case studies with previous data that we have, and some that's right, some that's wrong. I mean, I'm looking back at old lab submissions and trying to figure out if I can, scrub off the name or just take some of the types of mistakes and put that forward so they can, have some examples of when things go wrong, sort of thing.
Oh, sure. So all those students who used to be the bane of your existence are now gold, right? All those ones who never did anything right. You can mine old lab notebooks and try to get some information that way.
I'll speak up. This is Christina. So we actually do that already in our lab. We often give them alternate sets of data that are slightly wrong and ask them what that means. So we were doing that already, and I'll say that it works pretty well. And we ask them about controls that they may not actually have performed in the lab, but we ask them to interpret those controls, or we give controls the unexpected result and ask them what it means, and it works pretty well.
Nice.
Mm-hmm.
Although they have a lot of questions about it and really use office hours. So there is that slight downfall that office hours may be more difficult than usual.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm going to emphasize throughout this is that you really want to provide students with practice, because they're not necessarily, you're not there, that they can ask immediate questions. And so giving them multiple examples of any kind of assessment, I think, is really important, so that they can see whether or not they understand the concepts or can do the skills that you're talking about. Any other ideas about assessing, particularly this kind of knowledge of how to use things in the lab? What about practicals? Anyone have ideas? I don't know if people do practicals in microbiology. They were a big part of what we do.
In entomology, we do practicals, but we had just finished one before the suspension. So everything else, all the material we didn't cover, have to be tested a different way.
Mm-hmm.
It occurs to me that the lab time being in the afternoon would be a suitable time for an office hour for everybody across the country. I didn't have anybody outside of the US, but we could cover the 4 time zones with a reasonable compromise.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm going to try to do that, do lectures asynchronously and do part of the lab time synchronously, just so that they can talk to each other and to me. And then they would be provided with questions beforehand.
Sure.
Some so that we would explore.
And I
or-
think one of the things that I've heard recommended is to think about having, you know, maybe different times on different dates just to suit certain people's schedules. We do know that there are some students who will be going to libraries in order to access good internet, and sometimes the timing of when they can get places is going to be difficult, and you know, there could be all kinds of transportation issues. So as flexible as you could be about when students can interact with you, you know, it's really something important to think about. And again, to try to have multiple times for potential contact over the course of the week, so they don't feel like they're just working on homework in isolation. So
right.
a lot of things.
But I think also, we're really quite flexible. We're not going anywhere. They're cast to
Yeah.
the winds. So we need to find out when everybody, I mean, it has to be basically, everyone has to be able to get to whatever time, get to the resources they need.
So then the next question I would ask is what instruction would help students achieve the learning outcome, including practice? And I think that we talked about a lot of these. As we mentioned, videos are really useful when you're talking about methods or equipment. It's a way to demonstrate how they're done correctly or incorrectly. I think both of those would work. There's a whole lot of resources, in addition to just people who have put stuff on YouTube for videos. And again, I'm going to list those in a Google Doc for anyone who's interested. One thing I did want to bring up, and it's not something I necessarily know anything about, but I've heard people talk about issues with bandwidth when you're posting videos. And I don't know if there's any expertise in the audience about what's the best way to do that for students that might have limited bandwidth or who are paying for data as they use it. Any ideas about how we can help relieve some of the challenges of posting tons and tons of big videos online for students to use?
Hi, this is Ksenia from the Center for Teaching Innovation.
Oh, hey.
Wanted to chime in on this one. So definitely, so if you do create, let's say, assignments where you anticipate students to upload those videos to, so definitely uploading those videos to Kaltura, through Kaltura, because so each student has limited data per their lifetime of a user. So uploading those videos to a third-party cloud service would help eliminate that issue. Also for instructors as well, if they're posting videos of their lectures, let's say they record their lectures on Panopto, or they just do, let's say, a Zoom recording and then upload it into Kaltura. So also using those third-party services, meaning uploading through Kaltura or through Panopto, would help them eliminate any issues with the data limitation, because each Canvas site is limited to 3 gigabytes. So yeah, and we do have resources on how to do that on our website. So that would be teaching.cornell.edu, and I can send you the link later on.
Okay, great,
that.
thank you. Yeah. Anyone else have any ideas or suggestions?
Ksenia, actually, could you just describe how Kaltura interacts with Panopto briefly to understand the relationship between those?
Yeah, sure. So Kaltura and Panopto are two separate tools. There are two separate cloud services. Kaltura has unlimited storage. So we usually recommend uploading videos, just, movies or instructional videos, films through Kaltura. Any video assignments that students create, we recommend uploading those through Kaltura. Panopto is more for lecture recording, so that allows you to have two screens where you're showing yourself as the instructor talking in front of the camera, and you also have it also records your desktop screen with your PowerPoint. So this, once your recording is complete in Panopto, students can alternate between looking at the instructor full screen, or they can go and view the PowerPoint slides. So that's that's the basic difference. Does that make sense?
Okay, so yeah, then I definitely would encourage you to check out the CTI website, because there's tons of information there. But just another thing to keep in mind.
I have a question. I don't see Kaltura on Canvas, so I have to go somewhere else to a separate place to make Kaltura videos and then upload them. Is that correct?
I could. So I know that you're focusing on something else. So we do have instructions on how to do that. So you would generally create a page within your Canvas site. So if you, let's say, organize your content in modules or whatnot, you would create a page. And when you create a page and edit it, you will see the rich content editor, like a big square field in the center, and with a range of formatting options at the top. Kaltura icon is one of the icons that is provided there. At the top, it looks like a little sun.
Okay, thanks. I get where you're talking about.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Christina, have you had any experience loading iPhone videos to Kaltura? Do people do that?
Yeah, great question. If you use web browser version of Kaltura on your phone, of Canvas on your phone, web browser, not the app one, you can do that through your right through your phone. If you log in, into Canvas with your NetID through your phone, through the web browser.
Awesome.
Yeah, but you cannot do that through the app. The app does not have the Kaltura option in there.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So another type of issue that we could potentially come up against is being able to analyze, manipulate, examine, make conclusions from data. And so again, I kind of have the same questions. Is this something you could do remotely? And if yes, how would that happen? So I didn't know if anyone had any ideas about dealing with data or results, and how we could address developing those skills in our students remotely. I mean, we did hear some of those ideas about gleaning data from student notebooks and providing data sets with students. Any other ideas? And other ones I've thought of, you could use actual data from primary literature if you're looking for examples, or developing a case study around that is another way. And actually the analysis of results is probably one of the easiest things to deal with, because you can just provide that for them with instructions of how to do the analysis. And again, I would say give them a lot of practice in doing that, because you're not walking it through with them when they have the opportunity to ask questions if they don't understand things. You may want to do, sort of a live demonstration of walking them through it, just as you might do in a lab lecture or a lecture class. Does anyone do data analysis in their labs, and how do they approach it?
To me, this is a great question. I often assume that my students already know how to graph and do data analysis in Excel, but I guess it's often not the case. And so maybe doing an online demo through Panopto or something like that is a great idea.
Mm-hmm. What if your data isn't number? What if it's more visual? Then how could you address that? Are there some examples of that in your classes?
So they could take, like, so I'm working on a class that we were going to do a lab on photosynthesis where they grew plants and measured the rates of it. And of course, unfortunately now that's not possible, but we were trying to come up with ideas of what else can we do, and maybe having students take videos of plants, in their area, or trying to do some recordings that way, just like where they're located.
So in microbiology, we used to talk about doing Julia Child to our lab results. And so one possibility would be to just take plants at different stages, and I don't know how fast they grow or whether you have time for this, but to say, here's day 1, here's day 2, here's day 3, provide them with some kind of images or some other indication of the changes you were measuring. I don't know if it would be feasible for them to actually then make the measurements, because that's probably the best case scenario, right? Rather than give them a bunch of numbers, is there a way you can have them actually contribute? So the more raw the data is, the more analysis they have to do. Is there a way to have them try to do some simulation of measurement in order to figure out what you want them to know? I mean, I don't know. These are things to think about.
Yeah, I had a similar idea. We have a disk diffusion method with antibiotic resistance lab on Petri dishes. And so I was thinking of giving them pictures and then they could measure it. And even though their picture might be resized, you can have something in there for scale that they could use, maybe the computer to copy paste or whatever tools at their disposal. This is also not a well thought out plan, but something popped in my head. One free ImageJ is a free software that is often used in laboratories and has many features like counting how many light and dark, measuring an area, or measuring the length of things, I think. So there are virtual tools where they could do some kind of measurement like that, but I haven't looked into it and connected it to our exact labs, but you guys might want to think about that for your particular labs.
Yeah, and I wonder also if it was possible, and I don't know if you thought of this, Jim, with entomology, of having students go out and do their collections and do their assessments and then do sort of a group source data. If everyone does a few and you're trying to generate some kind of a curve or something for statistics, you could just have everyone do a little and combine the data and have them analyze the whole data set. I mean, there might be opportunities where that's appropriate.
Well, and some of the larvae that are around in spring are host specific. I was thinking I would give them chores to look at different host plants or to record that sort of data, and we would come up with some kind of, maybe catalog is too simple a word, but at least a breadth of resources that maybe differ across the country. I don't know. It all depends upon their ability to find things in the field, and it's all pretty new for them. So I'm not sure, but it would be a goal.
Were you the one mentioning iNaturalist? Because iNaturalist has some features like that. I saw in a workshop.
That's what we're going to use, yeah. And we'll all be on one project. And so then there's the advantage that there'll be other people chiming in with their opinions, but then we have our circle of people who would be basically cognizant. We'd all be following each other. So basically, the good thing, given I think the fact that they're going to be pretty bored, they can be active on iNaturalist, at any hour, and maybe that will soften the blow of being isolated.
Yeah, and if anybody else has good resources, particularly for this idea of group sourcing data and information, I know a lot of the genetic resources will allow people to kind of come together and do annotations and searches, things like that. It'd be really useful to have those sites. I think the Lab of O has some data sets that are available for the general public, and people can actually contribute to it. I mean, if you can somehow turn this around so that the students are actually generating useful data, that would be phenomenal. But the main thing is that you want to make sure that the students have opportunities to go through the process that you want them to understand and learn.
Right, you don't want to have the whole thing get hijacked by some other sort of master users of these sites, and then
Yeah.
they just sit there and go, oh, okay. There's got to be a way to take control of it once we get to a certain point,
Mhm.
and then bring it back to the classroom.
Right. And I think case studies would be an interesting way to try to assess some of that by giving them data sets and then asking them to do the analysis and the manipulation, for sure. Any other ideas about analyzing results or dealing with data?
Well, just what you just said, if they come up with a certain piece of data, several data points, then certainly we've got the experience to know the literature, and then we might be able to make it relevant to something someone's published, and then bring that in as an adjunct. I mean, sort of a tangential entry into the process.
Yeah, I found using and simplifying, I guess I shouldn't say stealing data from, but borrowing and simplifying data from the primary research is really helpful to me because it provides a framework. I don't have to start from scratch.
Right.
It's interesting for students. Other ideas about data?
So one thing that we use in food science, or has been used previously, is using Google Docs to put all that information together, and students generally can access that pretty easily. Just, if you do one experiment in a class and you have 24 data points, if they all put it in there, and I'll go back to that old data, of course, but a Google Doc is one place you can.
But the nice thing about that too is that it's easier when you have larger N's to introduce statistics, and they get a sense of the variability. And when it's real student data, they can see the nature of that variability. And so those are all really good concepts to introduce to students.
It doesn't need to be any more complicated than like descriptive statistics, but yeah, you can, depending upon the level of class, you can allude to other stats.
Nice.
Something
Go ahead.
that I've used in my class is Lab Archives, which is like an electronic lab notebook. That's pretty helpful. So students upload their data on there, and there are ways that students can make their data visible to other students and things like that. So, and then you can also, as the instructor, put stuff in Lab Archives, and that's a way for students to be able to share data and look at it. Things like that.
Does that have a graphing feature, Steve?
No, it's more like it. Actually, that's not true. Yeah, it integrates with like Google Docs, with Excel, things like that, online Excel. Although it's a little reduced in all of the features, but it actually, I mean, I've used it for the last couple of years, and I'm pretty happy with it.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a learning curve for the students, but I don't know. It for a lab class, I think it's a little bit easier than using Canvas.
And then, so a lot of these have been talked about: makeup data or data from old notebooks, data and figures from research papers, and then there's a whole slew of public data sets. And again, I'll post these on the Google Doc. From a wide range. There's a lot out there on genetics and molecular biology. There's a lot out there on environmental and ecological things. There's some plant stuff out there. And it's just a question of trying to find something that fits your particular needs, if you're interested in that. Other questions or comments or resources that people know about? All right, and again, practice, practice, practice. So whenever something is new for them, the more they can do it before the assessment, and the more opportunities you can provide for support of that, the better. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, so in our lab, we always had students design an experiment. And I think this is one of the more challenging aspects of lab classes. It's probably the most creative. So in our case, they had to write a hypothesis about bacterium biofilms, design an experiment, and we limited it so that they weren't doing just everything, and then graph and interpret. And so I wanted to kind of pick your brains about, not this one in particular, but in general, are there ways you could think of that would help develop and support the skills that I'm sure we all want our students to know, and that is experimental design and developing controls, especially when these are usually experiments that happen over time in the labs, and that's not really available to us now. So what kind of creative solutions are there for if we want students to conduct their own experiments?
One thing we use is SymBio. So on a computer, they can simulate adding different nutrients to algae to see how it grows.
Do you have to pay for that, Frank, or is
I
it?
was just trying to look that up. I don't know because I never had to be the one
Right.
paying, but I suspect that we're paying. I don't know if it's by the module.
Because that is one I've heard of before that has a lot of different kind of topics associated with it.
I put a link in the chat.
I've taught with SymBio, and I think you might have to pay by module because we never were able to do the one that Frank mentioned. We had more of the genetics simulations.
Any other ideas for your particular area of how you could have students try to design and, I don't know, in some way pseudo conduct an experiment? Or maybe they could do it in reality depending on what it was and how much equipment was needed or not.
It might be something to look into, like some of the high school biology, even workshops or anything, like, because we might not be able to do it at the level with the equipment we have here, but maybe something simple.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we also have this kind of project that is getting changed, but they could write up what they were planning on doing.
Yeah, I think that's excellent. If they designed it, here's my hypothesis. It would have to be, well, it wouldn't have to be, but, assuming it's a method that they were familiar with, here's how I would have done it. The thrill of actually doing an experiment is gone, but at least seeing if they can walk through the thought process would probably be valuable.
It turns out I was thinking about doing something similar in my class, which was have the students sort of make sort of lemonade out of a bad situation. And so I teach a genetics or a biochemistry and molecular biology course. And so I was thinking about asking the students to design a test for coronavirus, and just going through but not just some kind of general thing, but really kind of get down to the nitty-gritty details. So my students are seniors, so I think with some coaching, I think they could come up with some pretty interesting ideas. So that's I mean, of course they won't be able to do it, but
right,
it has a lot of interesting features also, I think. So
right, you could wrap in, maybe a small amount of research that they would have to do, and and one of the things that we've used before too is just to say, pick one of the methods that we've used in class and tell me a question you could answer. And maybe because they're not actually doing it, it would be more interesting because you're not limited to worrying about providing supplies for everyone.
No, absolutely. The sky's the limit.
Yeah, right. You can't actually work with coronavirus in this lab, but.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. Any other ideas from different fields or areas?
Well, I just had an idea that potentially with going with the coronavirus, like how can we use plants to, help with the social, separation or something, like maybe food related. Yeah, so that's kind of, I mean, in the past, I've also had, students make videos describing a complex topic. So like they could, make a video describing the experiment that they're planning on doing, like
Mm-hmm.
explaining it like they were to either their peer or maybe to in a middle school class.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that that's a great sort of alternative assessment, because then you have this finished piece that you could look at, and you can include peer review. I mean, there's a lot of things that you could do with that. Again,
Frank.
I was going to say, I received an email from the National Case Studies something or other, and it's about outbreak coronavirus diagnosis and transmission. I can send that. I could send you that if you tell me your net ID in the chat.
Yeah, or you could send it to me too. Or if
Okay,
you,
yeah,
just put it up there, and then we'll make sure that everyone has access to it. The Case Study Center in Buffalo, New York is also a great place for a lot.
That's the one.
Yeah. You kind of have to look through for what you want, because they do, a lot of these sites do have a lot of different levels, and some of them may be a little too basic, but it depends on who your audience is and what exactly you're looking for. And then
apparently Macmillan, I was just told, is providing a lot of free not equipment, but like information. So I don't know if anyone's working with Macmillan, like tech. I don't even know if you need a textbook, but someone passed on I guess one of their reps emails, and they might have some graphics or something to show.
Yeah, a lot of the textbooks do have videos that illustrate concepts that are really supportive for lecture-based courses. But if you were trying to give students some background information to bring them up to speed, that would be useful.
I got something from the bookstore recently that said that they were going to provide a certain amount of electronic resources to the bookstore, and you had to sign up for it or something like that.
I did see that email, but I don't remember the content of it. I think that might have been for students who don't have textbooks associated with the courses, that they would have access. But I don't know, how widespread. So if there are resources in a textbook you don't use, would those be available at all? I don't know. Is someone from CTI still on? If they know anything about that.
I am here, Sue, but I don't know the answer to that. It seems like companies are changing all the time what they're offering for free to people. So, yeah.
So that's something to check in with the Cornell bookstore, probably, in terms of, or maybe the libraries. That would be the other place of what kind of resources they have available. Let's see.
I wonder about, have you ever thought about like a choose your own adventure kind of activity as far as experiment, like designs and outcomes, if that might be something interesting for students if they can't be there in person, if you sort of guide them down a path and they make choices and have outcomes that happen because of their choices. I don't know. What do you think?
So would you program that for them to use, sort of a game-like thing, or is there a way to do that with less effort?
Yeah, I don't know. I just looked online and there's some freeware for doing that kind of like programming activity. But I was just thinking about it off the top of my head. That might be, maybe it's more simple than that, and you just do it yourself on a, in a Word document or something. But might be kind of interesting to, to give students some action and choice and see how they respond.
Mm-hmm. I think that would be really interesting, either in terms of carrying out an experiment, or you could even simplify that to doing a particular technique, as especially if there was something that had particular steps involved that had to be done in a certain order, whether they understood. But it would be nice if you could apply that more openly to different situations. I'm trying to think of how that would be useful? I don't know. Anyone have ideas about how that might be an interesting approach? So I have listed here some resources for virtual labs that I know about. And again, there's a wide range of them, and you kind of have to look through to see what you're interested in, but they are out there. I definitely would add SymBio to it. We can find out what the costs of those are. But I think there are examples of things that other people have developed which might make it a little easier than trying to do things from scratch yourself. I definitely would encourage you to keep up with that. Let's see, does anyone else have questions or comments, things that they wanted to ask about or have addressed that we didn't address?
Is there a way to make some of these things more accessible? Like if people are using, I don't know, screen readers or they need captions or something like that.
Carolyn, have you guys been working with the Student Disability Services at all in terms of how to help support some of the technology for students who have special needs? Oops, she may not be here. I think the Student Disability Services Office has been addressing that, but I haven't seen any resources that explicitly talked about how to help students. I've seen some things about assessment if students need more time, which is a very typical need. I don't know about the others, but if you know you have students in your classes that have a particular need, I definitely would encourage you to get in touch with them and see if they could provide some advice, because this really is a whole new medium for a lot of us, and it is really important to try to think of how things are going to look and feel from the student perspective when we haven't worked in them a lot ourselves.
Right. And I mean, it's like, it's technically required, by the ADA that we provide that. And so I think to also remember that it's hard for us right now, but it's even harder for the students.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a course, at the most maybe 2 we're dealing with. They have 4 or 5 that they're trying to keep up with, and everyone has different needs and different demands. And
right, I have a student who needs closed captioning help, and I've definitely been in contact with people from disability services talking about how that should work. And so there are resources out there if you have students who need them.
If you're making videos, can you set it up so that those are automatically closed captioned? Do you know?
Well, it is in Panopto, and I don't think that does closed captioning. So.
Yeah, and so it might be something where you have to write a script. So I'm just trying to investigate all that right now.
I had a student, an SDS student who was hard of hearing, and what I would do is anytime I had to present a video in class, I could send it to them in advance and they would add captions to it and send it back to me.
So you made the students do the work, or CTI?
No, the SDS employee added captions to the video and sent it back.
So that might still be an option. I mean, they could be overwhelmed right now. I don't know, but it could potentially be an option.
Well, usually, for this particular student, I don't know what the range of disabilities are for the students, but for this student, they had someone who was like assigned to them and went to all their classes. And so I wouldn't imagine that they would not be able to do it even in this environment if it's that type of student.
Right.
Just not everyone, has the SDS. We're able to get an SDS letter.
Yeah, I mean, theoretically, they all have access to it, and they should have done that. But I don't know. There are features on some software that will automatically do it. I don't personally like that because I find it to be more distracting when it cannot do it correctly. So there's a warning on that.
Then you have to kind of interpret as it comes in, right? Yeah.
There also will be 2 Center for Teaching Innovation webinars. I forget the schedule. I think one might be on Thursday about accessibility. But as other people have said, if you have students who have the letters, it's best to reach out to Student Disability Services first. But as Anna said, there's some people who may not have an official letter, and we still need to be thinking about them. So.
And same providing with for people with screen readers for a lot of the graphics, providing alternative text and things like that. A lot to think about.
Yeah, I know. Well, and I think the key is that we're not really striving for perfect at this point. I think we're trying to do the best we can. And that's one of the reasons I really tried to emphasize thinking about priorities. So rather than do a lot, just go down to the bones of what are the really important concepts that you haven't had a chance to address, or that you want to collectively kind of connect for the students and bring together, and just do a few things well, even if it's fewer than you may have done had students been here. That it's probably better to do something that's developed well and thought out and really gets at the core ideas, even though it's hard to let some stuff go. That's definitely one strategy. Anybody else have any closing wisdom to share or comments for us?
Can I ask another question? Actually, I have no closing wisdom, but can I ask another question?
Sure.
I was multitasking and finding out more about Kaltura, and I just have a question. So Kaltura seems to be serving just as a server so that they can be streaming videos that are already created and not using as much bandwidth. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, this is Carolyn from CTI. Yes, it's basically a way to upload the videos without taking up a lot of, storage, without creating storage space issues. So it's not for creating videos, it's really just for uploading them and making them available in Canvas.
But so Kaltura would solve the problem of the large size Zoom videos that get created. Like you can just put your Zoom video through MyMedia and Kaltura onto Canvas.
Yes. That's what they're recommending. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
So like for Panopto videos, you also want them to upload it to Kaltura first.
Right. Yes, that's also what we're recommending. Although some people are not following that, and so you also see that you could do that, but we're recommending doing it for Kaltura because of the storage issues.
Got it. And then there is a way, like I haven't played around with figuring out how to add Kaltura to Canvas site, but you said there are tutorials.
Yeah, and it's actually it's just an option when you're uploading materials to a page in a module. So you don't have to turn it on or anything. It's already there. You just probably haven't noticed it. It's another little icon. But this is maybe a case where you could just look at the Getting Started guide on our CTI website. It's probably the easiest thing.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So that brings another question. So Zoom has a whole menu option in Canvas. So with cloud recordings in Zoom, you'd rather us use it in Kaltura instead, like record it locally and then upload it into a Kaltura file?
Yes. So you would save the Zoom recording on your desktop and then upload it through Kaltura.
Okay,
and
thanks.
you recommend using Zoom like standalone or through Canvas?
Well, we're generally suggesting using it through Canvas, although either works. The reason to do it through Canvas is then if your students get notified more easily and then get the link more easily.
And is there, if people are having trouble authenticating Canvas, I guess we might be able to have to send them videos in other ways.
I guess I didn't understand that question.
Sometimes, because I think for Canvas you need two, what are those called? The two-step verification.
Right.
You're doing remotely, and so if that's another thing to consider, that maybe some students might have issues with that.
That might be more of a question for the students to try to solve with CIT. I don't know the answer to that one.
Got it.
But we're also, CTI has open Zoom drop-in hours from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday now, that you can access through our webpage. So if you're having trouble with one of these, you can just kind of drop by a Zoom session and somebody will be there to help you.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Okay, if there's no other questions or comments, I just want to thank you all for joining us. I hope it was useful. If you would like the link to the Google Doc, just send me an email at smm3@cornell.edu and I will give you the link. And I encourage anybody who has access to it, if you have resources that you know about, please do add to it. You know, just with maybe a word or two about what's there and well, just basically what kinds of resources are there. That would be super helpful, I think.